They said it wasn't worth anything. It's just another rusty skeleton floating at the edge of known space. The Galactic Salvage Registry only listed this logistics station as junk because it was so old and forgotten. No one wanted it. No one even knew who made it. It had been floating in silence for longer than most civilizations have been keeping records. Everyone laughed when Marcus Webb bought it for the price of a used cargo hauler. His crew laughed. His bank laughed at him. The automated customs clerk even paused for 3 full seconds before processing the purchase, as if the system couldn't believe a person was serious. But Marcus had a gut feeling, not a math problem, not a forecast based on data or a strategic projection. Just a quiet, stubborn, deeply human feeling that something inside that old, rusty giant was worth more than the steel it was made of. He was correct. What his crew found inside that station changed more than just their lives. Not only did it change the balance of power in their area, it brought back memories that the galaxy had been trying to forget for 100 years. This is the tale of the Iron Widow, the ship that was never meant to be there, the gun that was never meant to be found, and the crew of regular people who wouldn't leave something amazing. Take a seat. This one starts off slowly and then keeps going. People didn't come to the Veren sector to look for things. Things would come to this place and then disappear. The Veren sector was in a dead zone of gravitational interference. That made standard FTL navigation unreliable and expensive. It was beyond the last relay beacon of the outer meridian shipping lanes. It was avoided by commercial routes. Military patrols didn't even go there. Pirates weren't known for being careful, but they usually found better hunting closer to civilized space. The Veren sector was quiet, huge, cold, complete silence. Logistics hub Kestrel 9 was floating in the middle of that silence, like a body that had been floating for too long to be buried. Marcus Webb saw it for the first time through the front window of his salvage ship, the Durable. His first honest thought was that it looked like a city that had given up. Kestrel 9 was huge. That was the first thing that came to mind. Modern logistics hubs were small and worked well. They were sleek towers of processed alloy and pressurized modules that could handle cargo with the cold precision of a machine. But Kestrel 9 was made a long time ago, when people still thought that bigger was better and that having a lot of things was a sign of confidence. It was almost 4 kilometers long from one end to the other. The outside of the ship was a cathedral of rusted girders and broken solar panels. The wings had all folded in from decades of micrometeor impacts and no maintenance. The docking arms that used to reach out proudly to greet freighters now hung at broken angles, like the fingers of an old man who had fallen and never been helped back up. And it was dark. Not just dark, not just without power. It was the kind of dark that lives inside something that hasn't had a working light source in decades. It was so dark and settled that it seemed to have texture, like something you would have to push through. Marcus put his hand flat against the glass of the viewport and stared at it for a long time. "Are you sure about this, boss?" A voice behind him said. That was Danny Reeves. Danny was the youngest member of the crew at 26 years old. He was also the most vocal about every decision Marcus made that he didn't agree with, which was most of them. I bought it, Marcus said. We're here, Danny said. You bought a floating tetanus shot. I'm just saying that, Sandra Cole, who was in the co-pilot seat, pulled up the structural registry on her screen and scrolled through it with the same quiet focus she used for everything else. Sandra was 41 years old and had worked as a deep space engineer for 3 of the galaxy's biggest construction companies. She quit because, as she put it, she was tired of building things for people who didn't deserve them. Marcus had never worked with a better structural analyst than her. She had the special ability to look at something broken and almost instinctively know how it had broken. She hadn't said anything since they got into the sector. That was never a good sign for Sandra. About 30% of the original spec for hull integrity on the outer shell, she said without looking up. The eastern docking wing can't be fixed at all. The western wing has some usable framework and maybe 20,000 tons of alloy. That can be processed if we cut it carefully. Marcus asked, "What about the main structure?" Sandra stopped. "That's the part that interests me," she said. She zoomed in on the central hub display, which was the old station's core. It was a huge cylindrical spine that connected all of the outer wings and used to hold the main operations center, fuel processing units, and cargo sorting bays. Sandra said, "The outer hull is gone, but the spine in the middle is still closed. All the way up. The alloy used in the central structure is not the same as the one used in the rest of the station. More dense, military-grade compression weave, unless I'm reading the scan wrong." Danny asked, "Military-grade? At a logistics station?" Sandra said, "That's what I said." Marcus looked at the scan data himself by leaning over her shoulder. The central spine showed up on the thermal imaging as a different color than the rest of the structure. It wasn't the pale gray of cold, dead metal. It was something a little warmer. Not warm like a fire. It was warm, like something that had been cold for a long time and still wasn't completely cold. "Do you have any power readings?" he asked. Sandra was silent for a little while longer, the kind of quiet that meant she was looking at something she didn't know how to put into words. "Very small amounts," she said at last. "Not enough to register. But yes, there is something in there that still has a charge." Marcus straightened up. Carl Torres, the 4th member of the crew, was a heavy-set man who worked as their on-board systems specialist and general mechanical expert. For the past 20 minutes, he had been eating a protein pack in the back corner of the bridge and not saying anything. He crumpled up the wrapper and threw it toward the recycling bin. "What are we doing, then?" Carl said. Through the viewport, Marcus saw Kestrel 9. At the huge, dark, broken place. At the rusted arms, the wings that had fallen off, and the deep-sealed core that had somehow been able to hold pressure for all these years. "We're going in," he said. They docked at the only airlock on the outside of the station that was still working. It was a secondary maintenance hatch on the underside of the western docking wing. That was just big enough for a person in a full EVA suit to fit through with about 4 centimeters of space on either side. First, Marcus went. As soon as he stepped through the airlock and into the station's hallway, he felt the weight of the place in a way that the outside scans hadn't prepared him for. The size was mind-boggling, but it wasn't just that. The main hallway in the western wing was wide enough for a truck to fit through, and the ceiling was lost in the darkness above. Every surface was covered in a thick layer of dust made up of tiny bits of metal and other debris that had settled during the short times when the hull had been breached and then sealed again. The white cones of light from their helmet lamps lit up the dark. Every step sent up little clouds of grey dust that moved slowly and looked like smoke from a fire that had gone out a long time ago. Danny walked up to Marcus and looked down the hall. He said, "This place is huge," Sandra said over the comm from behind them. Kestrel-class hubs were the biggest logistical structures humanity ever built. This one was built during the expansion era, according to old records, before the resource collapse, before they began to make things smaller. Danny asked, "Why did they stop making them?" Sandra said, "Because they couldn't afford to keep them up. One of these costs more to run than 3 mid-tier colony ships." When cargo traffic moved to automated drones, buildings this size became useless right away. Carl shone his light down a corridor that split off to the left. The beam went into the dark without hitting anything. Marcus asked, "How far to the central spine?" Sandra looked at her navigation display and said, 1,200 meters. Through the old operations corridor and the main cargo processing bay. They got up and left. 20 minutes later, the cargo processing bay opened up around them like the inside of a huge cathedral. Even Marcus, who had worked in some big spaces before, stopped walking for a moment. The bay was about 800 meters long and 400 meters wide. Old cargo processing rigs, which were as big as small buildings, were stuck in place on the floor and ceiling. Their mechanical arms were stuck in mid-motion, as if they had been stopped between tasks and never resumed. There were conveyor lines all the way across the bay, still full of crates that hadn't been touched in decades. Some of the boxes had been opened, not by people, through the slow, steady pressure of time seals breaking, contents expanding or contracting with temperature changes, and the physics of abandonment doing quietly what nothing violent had bothered to do. Sandra looked at the crate's decay patterns and said, 60 years, at least, most likely longer. The registry said the station was shut down 83 years ago, Marcus said. Danny said softly, "Then this is what 83 years of nothing looks like." They got to the operations corridor from the far end of the cargo bay. This was a long, low tunnel that went straight to the central spine. The architecture changed here. The walls got thicker. The materials changed from regular construction alloy to something denser and darker, with a surface that absorbed the light from their helmets instead of reflecting it. They found the door at the end of the hall. Marcus didn't have any blueprints that showed it at the station. The records of decommissioning did not include it. They couldn't see it from any of the outside angles they tried. The door was a bulkhead door, a huge, round pressure seal that was almost 8 meters wide and set flush into the wall of the hallway. It looked like it had always been there, like it had grown there naturally from the bones of the station. It didn't have a standard way to control it. No keypad. There is no biometric scanner. There was just a flat panel of brushed metal next to the frame that was completely blank. There were also a series of mechanical lock wheels arranged in a pattern around the door's edge that Marcus didn't recognize right away. Carl stepped up and put his gloved hand on the metal panel. It didn't do anything. Sandra said, "There's power behind this door," and her scanner was almost touching the surface. Not small amounts. Power that is real. There is something important going on the other side of this wall. Marcus looked at the wheels on the lock. I counted them. There are 8 of them in total, spaced out evenly around the edge of the door. There were symbols on each one, not numbers or letters in any language he knew right away. "What language is that?" Danny asked. Marcus looked more closely. "It's not a language," he said slowly. "It's a way to write down a sequence of mechanical events. Old shorthand for engineers. They used it for manual override systems on secret hardware during the expansion era." Everyone turned to look at him. Carl asked, "How do you know that?" Marcus reached into the outside pocket of his suit and pulled out a small, worn notebook. It was made of real paper and ink, and everyone who saw it looked a little confused. He turned the pages. "My grandfather was a member of the expansion-era infrastructure corps," Marcus said. "Before it was broken up. He gave me his field notes before he died. For 20 years, I've been reading them without knowing why." He found the page he wanted and held it up to the light on his helmet. "I think I just figured it out. For 11 minutes. Marcus read his grandfather's notes while the rest of the crew stood quietly in the dark. Low-lit operations corridor. This silence wasn't because they were impatient. Danny, who normally couldn't stay quiet for more than 90 seconds, didn't say anything. The heaviness of the hallway, the thickness of the sealed door in front of them, and the readings on Sandra's scanner all made them feel like they were in a serious moment. That would have been wrong to interrupt with small talk. Carl did his own scan of the door's structure. He whistled in a low, soft voice. He said, "This alloy, I've never seen a rating like this in real life. This is the kind of stuff they used to protect planets. The stuff that is fit for the military." On a logistics station, Danny said again, repeating what he had said before. But this time he didn't say them like he was angry. He said them in a way that made him sound like he was getting scared. Marcus said it wasn't always a logistics station without looking up from his notebook, or at least not just a logistics station. He flipped the page. Read. Flipped to the next page. "My grandfather worked on what the Corps called embedded infrastructure projects," Marcus said. The official story was that they were building out the logistics network for the expansion push fuel depots, sorting hubs, and relay stations. And they were. But some of those buildings had a second use. He raised his head. Some of them were made to hide things. The hallway felt colder. "What do you want to hide?" Sandra asked. "Military assets," Marcus said. "Specifically, experimental military assets that couldn't be officially recognized. During the expansion era, the political situation was very complicated. 3 different groups were in charge of deep space development, and none of them fully trusted the others. Some projects that one group wanted to work on were hidden in civilian infrastructure. The other groups would have stopped or destroyed these projects if they had known about them. Hidden inside buildings that no one would look at twice." He shut the notebook. He said, The infrastructure cores built logistics hub Kestrel 9, but someone else came up with the design. Who? Danny asked. Marcus said, the Advanced Naval Architecture Division, which was the expansion-era's secret military shipbuilding program. The one that was officially ended before it ever made a ship. He stopped for a moment. Sandra looked at him. After that, she looked at her scanner. After that, she looked at the door. She said, "There's a ship in there," not as a question. "I think so," Marcus said. Carl said, "You think so?" Marcus said, "I know how to open the door. I'll know what's inside when we get there." He walked to the first lock wheel and looked at the symbols on it. He compared them to the key his grandfather used to write notes. The sequence was a mechanical language. Each symbol stood for a certain number of clockwise or counterclockwise turns, and the 8 wheels had to be turned in the right order to unlock the bolts, without setting off the fail-safe collapse mechanism, which would have sealed the corridor for good. His grandfather had written the notation key down in small, cramped handwriting on 4 pages, clearly not thinking anyone would need it. He wrote it down the way old people do, not because they think it will be useful, but because they think writing it down is a way to show respect for the knowledge itself. Marcus was thankful for that instinct in a way he couldn't put into words. He turned the first wheel. You can jam, hack, overload, or trick machines. People change. Every important function needs a human hand, according to the design principle. Carl said slowly, they built a warship that only people could use. No backups for automation. Not zero automation, Sandra said. But every automated system is a support function. Help with navigation, processing sensor data, and reporting damage. All of the real decisions, propulsion, weapons, evasive maneuvers are made by people. Marcus said, that's why it was a hot topic at the time this was built. The major powers were working on fully automated warships, drones, warships that are controlled by AI. The whole strategy was moving away from human crews because they are slower to respond, cost more to keep up, and feel pain. He stopped. The people who built this ship didn't agree with that idea, Danny said. They thought people were better. Marcus said, they thought people were irreplaceable. There's a difference. The operations center was a round room in the middle of the ship. It had 12 workstations set up so that every crew member could reach to other crew members with their arms. At the center of the circle was the central command position, which was a raised platform with a full 360 display system and a physical helm interface that looked like it had been made by someone who loved the idea of a ship's wheel and turned that love into something useful and powerful. Marcus walked to the command center and stood behind the helm. The screens were dark. None of the 12 workstations were in use. The ship was in deep standby, which means it was alive enough to hold pressure and keep its basic structure intact. But it wasn't moving. Nope. Carl, Marcus said. Can you find the main power connection? Carl was already on the move, running his hands along the walls of the operations center to find maintenance panels. He found one on the far wall, opened it, and looked at what was inside with an expression that went from surprise to recognition, to something like reverence. This engineering, he said, this is old-fashioned, but it's He shook his head. They made this thing to last. These are mechanical switches, parts that are physical. There is nothing digital that can break or get corrupted. He turned to look at Marcus. In theory, if the power cells aren't completely dead, Sandra said. The external scan showed a charge left over. Carl went on. Then, in theory, we could use only the manual relay sequence to get this ship to primary power. No need for an external computer interface. He stopped for a moment. That's good, because I'm not sure our systems would know how to talk to this one. Give it a shot. Marcus said. Carl spent a lot of time looking at the relay panel, reading the labels and following the circuit paths. Then he got to work. He asked Sandra for help 3 times and took 40 minutes. At one point, he sat back, pressed his palms against his eyes, and breathed slowly before continuing. At the end of 40 minutes, though, Carl Torres closed the last relay, stepped back, and said, "Okay, the primary power sequence is set. Marcus, turn on the main switch. It's the big one on the left side of the command platform, at the bottom." Marcus discovered it. A big, heavy toggle switch with a safety cover that he flipped up and kept open. He looked at the people on his crew. Sandra nodded her head firmly, and quickly, Carl crossed his arms and stared at the ceiling as if he were asking something up there. "To be patient," Danny said. "Just so you know, I had doubts about this." Marcus turned on the switch. Nothing happened for 1 second. The Iron Widow then woke up. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in waves, like waking up from a deep sleep. First one system, then another, then another. Each one set off the next in a chain reaction that grew, and grew until the whole ship was humming with a frequency so deep and steady that Marcus felt it not only in the floor under his feet, but also in the center of his chest, like a second heartbeat settling into rhythm with his own. The lights turned on. Full power to every part. The amber emergency lights were replaced by clean white operational lights that made the operations center look completely different, not a dormant relic, but an active space. A functional space, a space waiting for people to come in and do their jobs. The 12 workstations started up one at a time, and their screens showed startup diagnostics that went by so quickly that it looked like the systems were in much better shape than anyone could have expected. After 8 decades, the main displays at the command position came to life, showing the inside of the station's core shaft, the cradle arms, the dock connections, and the way up to the station's outer hull in 3 dimensions. The engines, which were the 8 huge drive nacelles along the ship's spine, started their startup cycle. Not completely lit, just a warm-up. It was the first step in a series that had been waiting for 83 years to start. The sound was amazing, not loud, but huger vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The floor, the walls, and even the air. The whole ship shook with energy that had been coiled up for a long time and was only now, slowly, starting to spread. Marcus stood at the command position with his hands on the helm interface. For the first time in his life, he felt that the word power meant something completely different. Sandra said from her workstation, "All primary systems online." Her eyes wide as she read the diagnostics. "Weapon systems are ready to go. Starting up shields. Marcus, the navigation computer, is working perfectly. It only took 6 seconds to map the local area. How can that be? Danny said. The hardware is 80 years old, Sandra said. The hardware is 80 years old and was built without a single part that could break down in a sealed space. They weren't making plans for the short term. They were making it so that someone could find it later, no matter what, and use it. Marcus said quietly, they built it so people could find it, or to live long enough to be found again, Sandra said. Maybe that's the same thing. Carl walked slowly to the engineering workstation and sat down, as if his legs had made the decision for him. He stared at the readouts for a long time. Marcus, he said, and there was something in his voice that Marcus had never heard before. Something that could have been awe. These engines power output when they are fully operational. He came to a stop. He looked at the numbers again as if he needed to make sure they were correct. Right now, there is nothing in this sector that can outrun this ship. And right now, nothing in this sector can take a hit from these weapons and keep fighting. Nothing, Marcus asked. Carl said, nothing. Not even clothes. Danny sat down at a desk. He didn't mention anything about making reservations. The galaxy had made some choices about how a warship should look in the present day. It was meant to be quick, smooth. It was built around sensor systems and electronic warfare tools that could defeat an enemy without having to fight them. The same basic idea guided military doctrine in all the major powers that explored space. The ship that sees first and acts first wins. Durability was not the main thing. Armor was not very useful because every kilogram of protective plating added weight, which made it harder to move and faster. And speed and maneuverability were what won battles. Warships of today looked like needles, like razor blades, like things that can cut through space quickly, hit without warning, and be gone before the target hits the ground. The Iron Widow looked like a hand. Sandra pulled up side-by-side specifications on her computer, comparing the Widow's design data to the profiles of current-generation heavy warships. In the Galactic Registry, the difference was almost too much to believe. The Spear of Morning, the Velery Confederation's flagship class, was the most advanced military ship in use anywhere in known space at the time. It was 400 meters long, while the Widow was only 300. It had more advanced sensor arrays, more modern electronic warfare suites, faster computational response systems, and a crew of 8 instead of the Widow's planned 12. The Spear of Morning was a better ship in every way that the military thought was important at the time. The designers of the Iron Widow thought the Spear of Morning was a target in every way that mattered. Look at the armor comparison, Sandra said, putting the specs side by side on the main display. The hull of the Spear of Morning could take a certain number of direct energy weapon hits before it broke down. By today's standards, it was a good number, Carl said, 11 times, and Sandra said, the layered plating configuration. I've been looking at it for the last hour. Each layer is made of a different alloy that was chosen for its ability to absorb impacts, spread heat, and move energy around. The layers talk to each other. The energy doesn't stop when one layer gets hit. It gets spread out over a larger area when it goes through the layer matrix. The more you go down, the less damage there is, so you can't just hit it harder, Marcus said. Hitting it harder makes the outer layers work better, Sandra said. The design actually works better when it gets hit with more energy than with less. She stopped for a moment. It seems like someone spent a long time planning how to attack this ship, and then built the response right into the hull. Because they did, Marcus said. He had been going through the design documents that the ship's computer had made available. These were a complete record of the engineering ideas behind the Iron Widow, and they were stored in the same physical memory banks as the ship's operational systems. The paperwork was very detailed. The person who wrote it wanted to make sure that whoever found the ship would not only know how it worked, but also why it was built the way it was. The main designer's notes were clear and didn't apologize for anything. The current trend in military shipbuilding is to focus on the attack that never happens, like the long-range strike, the jamming of communications, or the precise destruction of a target that never sees the attacker. This philosophy is based on the idea that everything will go as planned. History says otherwise. We are planning for the engagement that doesn't go as planned. When the plan has failed and the crew is in the middle of something terrible, the only thing left to ask is, can this ship handle it? Will these people be able to live? We are saying yes. They weren't designing for wins. Marcus read from the documents. They were making things to stay alive, which is a kind of victory, Sandra said. The galactic powers at the time disagreed. Marcus continued. The official review board that looked at the Iron Widow's design turned it down, because it was based on an outdated way of thinking about combat. He read from the screen, a vessel optimized for sustained engagement and physical durability represents a strategic regression to pre-modern combat doctrine and offers no tactical advantage over current generation precision strike platforms. Carl said they were wrong. Marcus said they were very sure, which is not the same thing. When they started looking into the security protocols in more depth, they were a revelation of a different kind. There were no digital security systems on the Iron Widow, not a single one. The Widow's security system was based on physical objects and people, while modern ships relied on software encryption, biometric databases, and AI-managed access control. Every secured system needed a physical key. Marcus found the real keys, which were cut to exact tolerances. In a locked cabinet in the operations center, it took two people to verify every important function using physical switches that were placed far enough apart on purpose so that one person couldn't use both at the same time. The ship's whole way of doing things was based on the idea that people would be there, doing things, and making decisions at all levels. A hacker couldn't find an override because there was no digital system to hack. There was no AI that could be tricked because there was no AI that could make decisions. There was no jamming signal that could stop the ship from working because it didn't send any signals WIRELESSLY to turn off the Iron Widow. You had to beat the people inside it in a fight. That was the whole point of security. The Velery have an EMP weapon that can shut down every electronic system. On a modern warship in for seconds, Marcus said. They've used it 3 times in the last 2 years to settle border disputes. It stops engagements before they start. Would it work on this ship? Danny asked. Carl looked at Marcus. Carl thought about it a lot. Yes, on the sensor rays. Yes, on the computers that help with navigation. About 40% of our secondary systems would go dark. Yes, he stopped. The engines, the physical control systems, the weapons' mechanical operation, the hull integrity, none of it. Zero effect. So, after their EMP, Danny said slowly, we'd be flying partially blind, but still completely functional and able to shoot back. While they're sitting there, Marcus said, wondering why we're still moving. The operations center was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. It had something in it that Marcus wasn't sure he would feel when he woke up that morning. Something that felt like power, but not in a loud or comfortable way. They did something for the next 6 hours that no one had done in more than 80 years. They learned how to fly the Iron Widow. It was hard. The learning curve was steep, and in some places it was almost vertical. The physical control systems needed muscle memory and spatial intuition that none of them had developed for this specific job. Also, because the ship's manual override philosophy meant that mistakes that a modern ship's AI would have caught automatically had to be caught by the crew themselves. It turned out that Danny had an instinctive understanding of the helm interface that surprised everyone, even him. His hands found the right motions faster than could be explained by conscious learning. Something in the physical design of the controls matched how he naturally thought about movement through space. Sandra learned how to use the sensor interpretation systems in about half the time Carl thought it would take. This was because the raw data outputs needed the kind of pattern recognition and structural intuition that she was best at. Carl owned the engineering station as soon as he sat down at it. At their most basic level, the ship's power systems weren't that different from the big industrial machines he had worked with. For most of his career, the fact that the controls were manual meant that his deep physical knowledge of how machines worked could be used directly. Marcus sat in the command position and learned how to be the center of the circle. He had to process information from 11 other stations at once, make decisions without all the facts, trust his crew's judgment, and turn that trust into clear direction. He had never done anything like it before. He also realized after 2 hours that it was exactly what he had been doing for 15 years of salvage work without ever having a big enough context to see it. They were not a military group. They weren't trained for what they were doing. They didn't have permission, support, or any kind of official status. But by the end of the 6th hour, the Iron Widow's systems were all up and running, tested, and working with a crew of 4 people who had never been on this ship before today. They had learned how to use it the old-fashioned way, by paying attention, trying things, failing, trying again, and not giving up. She's ready, Sandra said at last. All systems are normal, engines are running at full capacity. Weapons are alive but safe. Navigation has us plotted. She stopped. Marcus. This ship is ready to take off. Marcus sat in the command seat and looked at the main display. It showed him everything the Iron Widow was, everything it could do, and the full weight of what they had found and what they had woken up. He remembered his grandpa, about a man who had been involved in something amazing, but had to help bury it, and couldn't talk about it. Instead, he wrote it down in a notebook with handwriting that got shakier toward the end. He gave that notebook to his grandson without explaining why, trusting that the right time would come. He thought about what it meant that the time was right now. In this particular field, in these exact situations, he didn't believe it was an accident. They made the decision to move the ship not too far. Not yet. They didn't know where they were going or what they were going to do next. They just needed to get the Iron Widow out of the station as soon as possible, before Kestrel 9's structural decay got any worse. The outer hull was falling apart faster than Sandra had thought it would, and they didn't want the station to fall apart around the ship before they could get it out. But something else happened before they started the extraction process. The communications array, which had been passively running since the ship's systems came online, picked up a signal. They weren't the target. It was a commercial frequency broadband transmission, the kind of signal that moved through a sector all the time, giving out normal traffic and navigation information. Marcus wouldn't have noticed it at all if Sandra hadn't pointed it out. "There's an alert in the standard traffic broadcast," she said. "Recent it came in the last 4 hours." "What kind of warning?" Marcus asked. Sandra read it. Marcus couldn't find the right words right away to describe how her face changed. It went through a lot of different states quickly, and none of them were good. "The Velery Confederation has issued a sector acquisition notice for the Varen sector," she said. "They're saying it's Confederation land because of the Unclaimed Space Annexation Protocol." She looked up, effective right away. "All ships that are not part of the Confederation must leave the area within 48 hours. Or face," she stopped. "Subject to what?" Danny asked. "Confiscation and crew detention," Sandra said. "They're sending a fleet to enforce the law. 6 boats." With the Spear of Morning, the operations center was very quiet. "They know about the station," Carl said. "They have to. No one sends 6 ships, including their flagship, to take over a dead sector that has nothing in it," Marcus said. "They might not know exactly what's in the station, but they know something is wrong. The Iron Widow startup would have sent out an energy signal that could be picked up all over the sector." He thought about it. "We woke her up, and they heard it," Danny asked. "So they're coming to get her?" Marcus said, "Yes, they're coming to get her." The silence that followed was the kind that makes you want to ask a question, but don't want to be the first to say it out loud. Danny said it out loud. "What do we do?" Marcus looked at the main screen. The Iron Widow system's readout showed that everything was green. Everything was working. The ship was at full capacity, and it was ready for the exact kind of situation it had been built for. He looked at the screen that showed the navigation. After working with the ship's systems for hours, they were now familiar with the Varen sector that surrounded them. There are 6 places where a fleet of that size would most likely come in. He looked at the people on his crew. Sandra, calm and clear. Carl, steady and sure. Danny was young, scared, and still at his station. He remembered the last thing his grandfather said. "God help the person who wakes it up." Then he thought about something else. something that was written in the last part of the documentation archive, in the designer's notes. The part called he didn't get it the first time he read it. But he does now. The Iron Widow isn't a weapon of war. She wasn't made to fight. She was made for the moment when a fight can't be avoided. When the strong come to the door of the weak and think they already know what will happen. This ship is here to prove them wrong right now. Marcus put his hand flat on the helm interface. We're not going, he said. It took 2 hours to get out of the station. The zero-gravity cradle arms let go of the Widow with the same mechanical precision that had held her for 8 decades. Each arm retracted in order, and the ship slowly settled into free suspension in the center of the shaft, before the huge upper hatch, which Marcus found could be opened from inside the ship with a simple command, began to roll open. There were stars above them. For the first time, real stars were visible through the open hatch in the Varen sector's sparse field of distant light. This was the most welcome thing Marcus had seen since they had docked at Kestrel 9 that morning. Danny slowly and carefully turned on the engines, following the startup ramp sequence that the ship's documentation said to use. For the first time, the engines were turned on. Outside of a controlled environment, the sound was impossible to describe. The hulls soundproofing was amazing, so it wasn't very loud inside the ship. But the vibration was there. 8 huge drives coming on at the same time, each one a controlled reaction that moved the matter around it. The whole ship shook with an energy that felt less like machinery and more like something alive that had been silent for a long time finally speaking. The Widow rose through the shaft, and Kestrel 9 shook around them. Parts of the outer hull that had been held together by nothing but habit and old metal stress started to come apart. Panels broke apart and fell in slow, zero-gravity arcs away from the station's spine. As the ship rose, the rust and the damage from 8 decades of being left alone fell away, like a shell being shed or skin that was no longer needed. The Iron Widow was an open space for the first time in 83 years after clearing their station's outer hull. The whole sensor array started working in open space. The full navigation display showed the area in 3 dimensions. The communications array could reach all the way across the Varen sector and beyond. 6 Velery Confederation warships were moving at the standard fleet formation speed on the approach vector from the sector's eastern boundary. The formation center was the Spear of Morning. Even from this far away, the Widow's sensors picked up on the shape as sleek, cold, and confident. It was the most powerful military ship in use at the time, surrounded by 5 support ships and carrying a crew that had no reason to think anything other than that the annexation operation would go smoothly. Sandra opened the standard military communication channel for the Confederation. "They're calling us," she said. "The Spear of Morning is sending out a standard order for annexation compliance. They want us to say who we are, stand down, and get ready to board." Marcus looked at the tactical display, saw the Iron Widow's weapons readout. All of the hull integrity indicators were green, solid, and built to handle exactly what was coming at them. Marcus said, "Give them our ID, complete and correct. Marcus Webb, salvage vessel." He stopped. "Salvage ship Iron Widow. Under human salvage law, it is registered in the outer sector. He stopped again and let them know that this area is under active salvage claim. Our claim, filed and registered before they sent out their notice of annexation. Sandra gave him a look. Is that true? It is now, Marcus said. File the claim, Carl. Timestamp from when we first docked. Danny, stay where you are. Carl's hands moved quickly around his desk. He said, filed, sent to the registry for the outer sector. We now officially have a claim on Kestrel 9 and everything in it. He raised his head. That's a different question, though. Let's find out, Marcus said. The Spear of Morning replied within 90 seconds. The voice on the channel was calm and professionally cold, like someone who didn't expect their orders to be questioned. Salvage vessel Iron Widow, we have received your claim and will review it according to Confederation legal procedure. Right now, you are in a military-grade ship that is not registered and is in annexed Confederation territory. You must stand down right away and get ready to board. Resistance will be seen as an act of aggression. Marcus took the comm himself and said, Confederation fleet, in a calm, steady voice. This is Marcus Webb, the registered owner of the Iron Widow salvage ship and the Kestrel 9 logistics hub. My ship does not have an unregistered military configuration. It is a human salvage vessel that we legally bought and is now operating under human salvage law. In an area that was not claimed when we got there, he stopped, and I think your sensor team should take a full reading of what you're looking at. Before you make any more decisions, there was a break on the Confederation side. It took longer than it should have for a simple acknowledgement. Marcus understood what that pause meant. It meant that their sensors had finished scanning. It meant they were looking at the numbers, the rating of the hull, the way the weapons are set up, the power output of 8 drives that were made when the word excess was seen as a sign of respect. It meant that the Spear of Morning was looking at something for the first time in its operational history and didn't know what to do about it right away. The break lasted for 30 seconds, then 40, then a whole minute. Marcus, Danny said quietly from the helm. They're not moving forward anymore. Marcus nodded. Sandra said, response incoming. He kept his eyes on the tactical display. The Spear of Morning is, she stopped. She made a small, involuntary sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was close to one. They're asking for a delay in the legal consultation. 48 hours. While our salvage claim is being looked at. Carl let out a long breath. Danny said, they blinked. Marcus said, they figured it out. And the math didn't work out the way they thought it would. He looked at the tactical display one last time. The 6 Velery ships were still and not moving forward. Then he looked at the main viewport, the empty space of the Varen sector around them, the old, rusty bones of Kestrel 9 below, and the stars above. Sandra, he said, let them take their time. Under human salvage law, file for a full legal review. Put us in touch with the best claim lawyer in the outer sector. And then, Sandra said, Marcus sat back in the command chair, which had been made for a human body and mind. It had been waiting for someone to sit in it and mean it for 83 years. And then we hold our ground, he said. That's what this ship was made for. The Spear of Morning left the area 14 hours later, saying it was still reviewing the case. 3 of the support ships went with it. The other 3 stayed behind. They were there for 11 days. On the 12th day, the Outer Sector Legal Review Board made a preliminary decision in favor of Marcus Webb's salvage claim. They based their decision on the previous registration timestamp and the relevant parts of human salvage law. The decision wasn't final. It would take months, maybe even years, for the whole legal process to be over. But it was enough. The other Velery ships left. For now, the Varan sector was theirs. On the 13th day, Marcus sent a message to his bank. A short one, 2 lines. No explanation. It wasn't trash. I was right. The bank, to its credit, didn't laugh this time. In the weeks that followed, news spread. It spread like things do in the outer sectors, slowly at first, through the informal networks that linked salvage crews, independent operators, and the small groups of people who lived in the spaces between the major powers. Then, as the story got too big to keep quiet, it got louder. A salvage crew bought a broken-down station for free, had walked inside its rusty bones and found something sleeping there, waking it up with a notebook, some old lock wheels, and the stubborn refusal to believe that something forgotten was the same as something lost. Had stood their ground against a fleet from the Confederation with a ship that was 80 years old and refused to back down. There hadn't been many stories like that in the outer sector in a long time. It wanted one. Other salvage crews began to pay more attention to what they bought. People looked at old, decommissioned stations that had seemed like they were only worth scrap metal again, this time with a new willingness to question whether the obvious surface was the whole story. Over the next 3 months, the Velery Confederation filed 6 separate lawsuits against Marcus's salvage claim. He won all 6 of them. Carl spent those months doing what he did best, fully understanding the Iron Widow's engineering and figuring out which parts needed to be updated, while keeping the design philosophy that made her what she was. It turned out that the answer was very little. The Widow didn't need to be brought up to date. She needed a team. They were careful about who they hired. Marcus was clear about what he wanted. Not military training, not combat experience, and not credentials. He needed 12 people to work at 12 stations. People who could learn, who paid attention, who didn't freak out, and who had the unique human trait of being able to adapt when things went wrong. Instead of freezing, he found them. Sandra technically chose them. She interviewed each candidate with such care that it felt less like hiring and more like engineering, finding the right parts for a system that had to work in very bad conditions. She was good at it. She told Marcus in private that it was better than most of the jobs she had done for other people. Danny stayed. He had never doubted that. The galaxy, despite its vastness and accumulated wisdom, often forgets something. It forgets that things that are thrown away still have value, even though they are no longer needed. It forgets that what one culture thinks is old-fashioned, another culture might think is just right. It forgets that the newest ship, the most advanced AI system, or the most advanced weapon are not the most dangerous things in space. In any part of space, The most dangerous thing is a person who won't believe that what they see is worthless. Everyone else had passed by the rusty station, but Marcus Webb bought it. He brought a crew that were only skilled, focused, and willing to work. He took with him a notebook that an old man had written in. He didn't think anyone would ever need it, but the knowledge felt too important to let go. And in the dark heart of a forgotten outpost, he found something that the galaxy had chosen to hide. Not because it was weak, but because it was too strong, too honest, and too dedicated to the idea that the people inside the machine were just as important as the machine itself. The Iron Widow wasn't made to win wars. She was made to make a point. In simple terms, that point is this: the strong do their math. They look at what's in front of them and decide what will happen. A lot of the time, they are right. They are right so often that they start to think that their guesses are facts. They forget to include the variable that they can't measure. They don't think about what happens when someone just won't. Leave. Marcus Webb didn't own a fleet. He didn't have an army. He didn't have permission, support, or any of the other things that people usually need to have before they stand their ground against 6 warships. He had a ship that was made just for that time. His crew learned quickly and stayed on task. He had a notebook that belonged to a man who cared enough about something to write it down for someone who wasn't even born yet. And he had the one trait that people have been trying to get rid of for hundreds of years without success. He was absolutely, completely, and without a doubt sure that this situation was not over. It wasn't. It never is. The stars don't care who owns them, but the people who get to them remember. Sleep well and stay strong.